The 2025 NFL draft has officially come to an end. We finished all of our draft grades. Now we're going to go ahead and start previewing the next football season. And I'm going to do both college and pros. We're going to kick it off though by previewing the SEC, and then we'll look into the Big Ten, and then we'll do Big 12 and ACC. And that's probably where I'll leave college football, at least for my previews. You're going to see me talk about prospects for next year's draft, possible people who I think could be good. We're going to highlight seniors and people who should be in the draft from each conference. That way you can get an idea of who we might be looking ahead to. We're going to kick it off with my favorite team, the Florida Gators. We're going to go through the offensive side of the ball, the defensive side of the ball, and then we're going to go ahead and take a look at what I think their record projection will be. I have no idea how long this video will be, so go ahead and hang around. We're going alphabetical order after my Gators. DJ Lagway is the quarterback, and you know what? This kid could be special. He's a sophomore, and he's a true sophomore at that, so he's not even draft eligible next year. He has a lot of traits that could make him special. He has a great arm. He is an excellent creator with the ball in his hands. Now, he does have some flaws he needs to work on a little bit. As exciting as he is, there are moments where he does show that freshman side of him a little bit. He forced the ball. He went big game hunting when he could have checked it down. He was just erratic at times, but he gives you a lot of hope. He didn't lose a single game that he started and completed. We lost against Georgia, but he didn't finish that game, and we were threatening him in that game. And I honestly think we probably would have won if he didn't get hurt. He ended up having just too many turnovers last year, and that was kind of a big problem for him. He does need to work on getting his completion percentage up a little bit. His rushing stats weren't really there, and I do believe he'll be able to run a little bit more next year. He was dealing with a major hamstring injury that honestly I thought was going to make him miss the rest of the season, but I guess because of the fact that Graham Mertz was hurt, he went ahead and toughed it out, and he played the rest of the way, and he honestly played pretty well, and he showed a lot of flashes. Other people to look for on the offense is Eugene Wilson, the third, Trey Wilson. Him coming back healthy from his injury is going to be huge for this offense. He's a great receiver, and I really do think that he could be an underclassman that could declare with a big year. We also have true freshman wide receiver Dallas Wilson, who flipped from Oregon. We're really excited about him. We actually have a lot of good young receivers that are not draft eligible, like Dallas Wilson, you know, Aiden Mizell, Tank Hawkins. I mean, there's so many of them. I'm really excited to see what these guys can do going into the future with DJ Lagway, but we do have one more guy that transferred in, and that's J. Michael Sturdivant. He's a transfer from, I think it was UCLA. I actually don't have the notes right ahead of me, but I'm pretty sure it was UCLA he transferred in from, and he's been a big time player that people have talked about in the NFL for a while. He's just never really put it all together and never declared. The hope is coming here with DJ Lagway, he will be able to do that, and he'll be able to have a big year. Our other starting receiver was Khalil Jackson, who's a senior. He got hurt last year, but he had a pretty good year when he was out there. I don't think he has the highest upside, but he could make some plays for us. At running back, true freshman Jaden Ball really impressed last year. Jacoby Jackson looked good. Tight end, we have Hayden Hansen stepping into the starting role, and I do think that honestly he played better down the stretch than Arliss Boardingham, who traded away or transferred away, not traded away. So I'm excited to see what he can do with a full workload over the course of the entire season. Across the offensive line, Jake Slaughter is probably the best NFL prospect on this entire team. You know, barring a few defensive players that could fight you on that thought, but he's an All-American center and he's awesome. He should have declared for last year's draft, but he decided to return to Florida, and you know what? As a fan of the Gators, I'm really grateful for that. Left tackle Austin Barber has been really solid for us. I don't know how high he'll go in the draft. I haven't finished up his film study, but I will say he's been a solid starter for us, and I could see him being a solid tackle prospect. I just don't think he'll ever be an elite tackle prospect. On the interior, Damian George Jr. is a guy to know about. He's a senior. He might be able to get himself a little bit of late round hype later on in the process. Flipping it over to the defense, Tyreek Sapp is a beast on the D-line. He's an edge rusher. He's somebody that's going to make a huge impact for us. Him and Caleb Banks both really can fight to go early in round one. I do think both of these players possess the NFL size, the NFL measurables, and the skill set to translate into being good NFL players. I thought Banks might honestly declare after last season. I was super happy he came back, and having a big guy like that who can impact the middle of our defense is going to be very important for us next year. I do think this team is going to be able to take a step forward on offense with Lagway healthy and playing the entire season. Hopefully our defense, with getting Sapp and getting Banks back, will be able to pick up and finally make this Gators team turn around, because honestly it's been a long struggle for the Gators, and I'd love to see him finally turn that corner after a while. But they also have Devin Moore, who I have pictured here on the right hand side. He's somebody that I think could step up. He's a junior corner who's been really good. He's long. I think he'll pair well with Dijon Johnson, our other corner, if he, you know, whatever happens there with his legal issues he's had lately. Don't really know how that's all going to work out. At safety, Jordan Castell and Aaron Gates and Bryce Thornton were all good last year, and I think that they'll be able to step in and play good roles again for us this season. We have underclassmen Cormani McClain and Miles Graham. Cormani McClain at corner is a wild card. I could see him stepping in, especially if Dijon Johnson doesn't start to begin the year, because of his issues. I think Cormani could step in. It looks like he added weight, and he's a very highly rated prospect. So we'll see what he's able to do with us there, this year and how big of an impact. But he's a guy that's kind of under the radar in a way that I think could blow up with a really good season. Miles Graham, like I said, he's a good middle linebacker. He's going to step in, and hopefully he's able to solidify the middle of this defense. We got George Gums, who played last year. He's kind of like a edge rusher, plays a little bit of linebacker. We are going to miss Jack Pyburn, who transferred away to LSU, but hopefully we can fill in with some of these younger guys and not miss too much of a beat. Overall, I will admit I am pretty hyped up about this Gators team. Going ahead and taking a look at their schedule, they're over under 7.5 wins, and I'm going to honestly nail the over, as you can tell here. I have them beating Long Island and USF. I say LSU and Miami are a toss-up. Probably won't beat Texas with how bad that game went last year. I just don't know that we're that close to an elite team. Texas A&M could be a toss-up. I think we'll beat Mississippi State. Georgia's a toss-up. We almost had them last year. I honestly don't know how good Georgia's going to be this year. I do think they're still a good team, but I think we're closing the gap on them, to be honest with you. As to where Texas just keeps getting better and better. I do have us beating Kentucky. I have Ole Miss as a toss-up, even though I almost lean towards giving that a win. But, as a Gators fan, I'm probably a little overhyped about how this season will go. This is a really tough schedule. I do have them beating Tennessee and Florida State to finish out the year. With the 4 or 5 toss-up games in here, I'm going to have the Gators actually finish 9-3 this year. I'm going to have them hit the over, and I think that they're going to have a really good year. I really trust DJ Lagway. I think that with him being healthy, we'll see improved playmaking from him. He won't be, hopefully, as limited with his running ability, and we'll be able to see that part of it come out a little bit. And I honestly think that his playmaking ability is what's going to be the difference. He'll push the ball down the field. He's aggressive. He has a great arm. And I do think that he's going to be able to make this offense more dynamic than it's been in a really long time. As a Gator fan, I'm optimistic, and this is probably an optimistic view, which is why I didn't leave them in order. I'll admit, as a Gator fan, I do have a little bit of bias there. I'd like to say I don't, but, it's really hard not to. I'm a fan, and I'm rooting for these guys, and I really am confident with this team this year, and 9-3 to me doesn't seem out of the picture. Going ahead and moving on to Alabama. They're the next team we're going to preview as we go in alphabetical order here. Ty Simpson's likely going to be their starting quarterback next season. I forgot to put the year down on his notes that I'm looking at here as I'm going through these, and I want to say he's a redshirt junior or sophomore. He waited his turn, and to see him take over, he has a lot of tools. He's a big quarterback. I do like him quite a bit. He just hasn't played much, so you don't really know what you're getting with him. And that's kind of the wild card with Alabama this year. They still have an excellent playmaker in Ryan Williams out there playing receiver. He's not even draft eligible, but it's a name you need to know for the 2027 NFL draft. They have receiver Jeremy Bernard, who was pretty good last year, probably more of a mid-round guy to me. Left tackle Caden Proctor is going to be one of the best tackles in this class, and he will likely declare early unless he has a bad season. At running back, Jam Miller returns. I do think that he can make an impact. Honestly, I don't know that he's necessarily lived up to what they thought he would be. I had certainly a little bit higher hopes for him, especially after looking at what my notes were for a preview last year that I didn't end up putting out on the channel because I was focusing on video games more. This year I decided I don't want to do that. I like talking ball, and this is the best way to do it. I didn't get it out, but I definitely had higher expectations for him, and he just didn't meet them last year. Parker Brailsford will probably be a mid-round pick. I haven't finished tape on anybody here in the summer, but I did see him. I watched, obviously, Alabama's offensive line, so I'm very aware of who he is. At right tackle, Willikin Formby is another guy that they think could be a draftable player. Haven't checked his tape out, so we'll have to see. Receiver Isaiah Horton, somebody who's big that I think could step into a role here at receiver for these guys. It's just a lot of unknowns with the quarterback, really, and Ryan Williams is going to take a lot of them targets because he's such a dynamic player. I just don't know how many targets are going to be out there for the rest of these guys. That really is just going to be a question we don't get answered until later on. Dre Washington is another player I had highlighted here. He's a transfer from Louisiana. I think that he could play some snaps. Obviously, at running back, most teams rotate, so I wanted to put him on here. Looking at their defensive players, LT Overton's a guy that I thought might have declared for last year's draft. He returned. I think he's going to be primed to take a jump hopefully next year and solidify himself as a solid first-round pick. Deontay Lawson's a guy on tape last year that popped. I mean, everybody loved Jahad Campbell, but as I was watching tape, Deontay Lawson kept popping for me. I really think he could be a high draft pick. I'm a big fan of him, and he's impressed me big time when I was watching tape. I haven't completely finished his film study, but he had some wow plays that even though I wasn't watching him, they stuck out to me. At cornerback, they got Damani Jackson. I think he could be a real impact player. He could possibly be an early pick for these guys if he continues to develop. At safety, Keon Sabb's a veteran that's been there for him. James Smith and Tim Keenan, the third, will make up a a big chunk of that D line, and I think they're going to be impact players. Once again, playing at Alabama, there's a good chance they'll end up being draftable. I haven't watched their tape, but they're guys to know heading into next year. Bray Hubbard's another senior player on this roster that's a starter. Don't know much about him. I'm not going to pretend I do, but I want his name out there. And then one guy that I put on here that's a transfer from Florida, Kelby Collins. I honestly think that this man could be a real impact player for him. He is a high recruit that just didn't really work out for the Gators. He kind of fell out of favor and got knocked out of the rotation last year. And I just really had high hopes for him, and I was sad to see him go. So I do think he could be an impact player for him this year if he steps in and works hard. Alabama's over-under for the season is 9.5 wins. All these are based off, I wanted to say, FanDuel, I think, so I did them off of. They opened up the season, though, against Florida State. As you can see, I gave them a dub against them, UL Monroe, and Wisconsin. Honestly, I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't expect any of one of them three teams to be that great. Versus Georgia, I did a toss-up. You know, that's always a good game, and you just don't really know. And both teams, although I don't think they are as good as they were a few years ago, are both still powerhouses, and they're pretty big forces to be reckoned with in college football. So that should be a good game that everybody's excited to watch. Then they get Vanderbilt, and I do think they get their revenge and beat them. Last year was an odd year. You know, I just don't expect that to happen again. They play at Missouri. I do think they'll win that game. I think Missouri's probably not as good as people would like them to be. Tennessee, I did as a toss-up just because I really don't know what to think about them. In my gut, I want to say they're going to be worse than people expect, and I think they'll certainly have a worse record than last year. They're a tough scheme for Alabama, and they always seem to play good games against them, so I'm going to leave that as a toss-up, as a rivalry game. At South Carolina, I'm going to have as a toss-up. I'm betting on them trying to be able to build off that momentum last year. I think South Carolina's possibly going to be a very improved team, and hopefully this time they're good enough to get themselves into the college football playoff. Lenora Sellers is a quarterback that I'm pretty excited about. You know, I know he has a lot of work to do and he's pretty raw, but he's a guy that has number one overall pick type of tools and change your franchise type of tools when it comes to the NFL draft. And I honestly think that I'm looking at South Carolina saying he's going to step up and develop, and that's going to make them that much better next year. So this is a toss-up game. LSU, that's a toss-up. Garrett Nussmeier returning. Honestly, I probably would have put it as an L had it been on the road, but it's not, so I'm going to put it as a toss-up. Oklahoma, Eastern Illinois, and at Auburn the end of the year, those are all dubs for Alabama, in my opinion. Auburn's always a little weird when they're at Jordan-Hare Stadium. You never really know what's going to happen there, but they've had some real weird games. But I will say I'm going to give them a W there. Looking at their toss-up games, they have 4 of them on here, and I think we say probably they'll split them games, and they'll go 10-2 on the season. I do think Alabama's going to hit the over, and we're starting off with 2 teams on the over. I certainly promise you as we get going in this, that's not going to be the case for all of them. I'm just a big fan of Kalen DeBoer, and I do think that he's a good head coach, and I think he knows what he's doing, and I certainly feel like he's going to get that team turned around, and they're going to stay dominant. Last year, they weren't as good as they should have been, and I was okay with them missing the playoff. This year, I think they're going to take a step forward because I trust their head coach, and honestly, they don't have Jalen Milroe, and I want to say I feel a little bit more confident about the level of consistency they're going to get out of a Ty Simpson, because I think Milroe is just too high and low, and that's kind of his biggest issue. And I think Simpson's going to be able to come in and maybe not be as dynamic, but I think you'll probably get steadier play out of him, which could make this team better overall. We'll have to see though. Next up, we're going to move on to the Arkansas Razorbacks. At quarterback, they got Taylon Green. He had a decent year last year. He had 15 touchdowns, 9 picks, 3,100 yards, rushed for 600 yards, added 8 more touchdowns, hit 60% of his passes. It was his first year in Arkansas after transferring from Boise State, playing for Bobby Petrino, who's the offensive coordinator here. Honestly, I don't know what to make of it. I like Taylon Green. I have not finished film study on him, so I can't say for sure on how I feel about him as far as a prospect goes next year. But he's a guy that has a lot of tools, and if he takes a big step forward, you know, I could see him becoming a high-level prospect in Arkansas overachieving. The problem is I'm not a big fan of the rest of their roster, and I really don't know how good this team's actually going to be, which could kind of stop him from developing and showing a lot of potential and reaching what I thought was pretty high upside a few years ago, watching him just kind of casually at Boise State and stuff. And then the games last year I watched casually as well at Arkansas. Looking at their draftable prospects, they have Fernando Carmona, an interior offensive lineman. Tight end Rohan Jones transferred over from Montana State. You know, I don't know what to expect from him. It's a step up. We'll see what he's able to do. At running back, they have Braylon Russell. Wide receiver, they have Omega Blake. He transferred in from Charlotte. At tackle, Corey Robinson II transferred in from Georgia Tech. Wide receiver Ishmael Sissy transferred in from Stanford. They have wide receiver Monte Harrison, who had a decent season last year looking at his stats. stats, so I wanted to include him. On the interior of the offensive line, they also have Keyshawn Blackstock, who could be an impact player for him. And then they had wide receiver Antonio Jordan, who's a freshman. He was listed pretty high on the depth chart for a true freshman, so he might be able to make an impact, even though he's not draft eligible. I wanted to include him because anytime I see a freshman kind of high on depth chart like that, it tells me that they really believe in his upside, and there's a strong chance he's going to actually be an impact player for him. I just don't see a lot of true prospects. There's a lot of, we'll have to wait and see how they do after transferring. Carmona is probably the one I was most excited about, but even still, I don't know. Looking at their defense, honestly, this is kind of sad if you ask me. On the interior, they have David Okoye, who transferred in from Abilene Christian. Xavier Sori Jr. at linebacker is probably their top prospect on defense. Cam Ball's an interior D lineman that's pretty good for them. We'll have to see. Once again, like I said, haven't finished tape on any of these guys, but these are big known players that are expected to be impactful for these guys, and names you should know if you follow the Arkansas football or just college football in general. Looking at linebacker, they have Steven Dix Jr., another guy that I've heard of. Haven't watched his film, but I do know of him, so I do expect him to make an impact for this defense. At safety, they have Larry Worth III and Miguel Mitchell, who's a transfer from Florida. He's only a junior. Mitchell played at Arkansas last year. I really liked him at Florida the year before that, and he's a guy that I will admit, as a Gator fan, I watch every game. I watch every all 22 film that I can get from the Gators. There was only a few games last year I didn't get to see, and honestly the year before that the same thing. So I'm really comfortable talking about these, and Mitchell's a guy that I like, and I think he could be impactful for Arkansas. We'll have to see. It's a second year there. Hopefully he can take a step forward for him. He still has another year of eligibility, so he may not be in the draft, but I do expect him to be impactful. They got some more transfers at corner, and Caleb Wooden, who played at Auburn last year, and Jordan Young, who came from Cincinnati. He's another former Gator. He was young when he left the Gators, though, so I never really seen him play. I just remembered his name and as a recruit. And then Julian Neal was listed as a DB. Played at Fresno State last year. I think he was a corner, but I never really got that confirmed, and I just don't know that much about him, but they were pretty hyped about getting him in the spring portal. We'll have to see how big of an impact he ends up making for these guys. Arkansas, though, as you can see, they have an over-under of 5.5. And I'm not very confident they're going to get there. I really only have 3 solid wins for them, and that's Alabama A&M, Arkansas State, and Memphis. They have a couple toss-up games. Tennessee, just because they could be really high or really low. Auburn and Mississippi State are toss-up games. Mississippi State, I expect to be pretty bad. Auburn, I still don't know how to feel about them. I think if I was a fan, I'd look at them more in the perspective of the Gators. But because I'm not a fan of them, I'm able to look at them and go, I could see them really overachieving because they did get Jackson Arnold in the transfer portal to come play quarterback. But at the same time, that sometimes doesn't work out because Arnold wasn't what you hoped he would be at Oklahoma. So what if they disappoint again and they could be another 5-win team? So I'm not comfortable with them. They're probably going to have a lot of toss-up games. And then I also gave him a toss-up against Missouri because, well, I'm just not very confident in Missouri. And then I do think they'll lose to Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, LSU, and Texas. Most of those games are on the road, and they're really good opponents, so I just don't think they're going to be able to do it. My final record prediction for them is going to end up being 5-7. I just definitely don't think they're going to be able to hit the over. I don't see 6 wins on this schedule unless Talon Green blows up and takes a big step forward like I thought he would after leaving Boise State. I just honestly don't see a way where they get to a bowl this year. I'm not confident in the roster. I just don't think they have a lot of great players. Certainly hate to be harsh, but sometimes you just got to look at it from an outside perspective and say the reality is they're just not very good, and 5 wins is generous. I almost went with 4 for these guys, so we'll see. Hopefully they do better and Sam Pittman can keep his job and keep him kind of in the middle there. I remember back in the day, Arkansas used to be good, and it'd be kind of nice to see them kind of rise and do something because, it's nice to see schools do that, but I'm not confident they'll do that this year. Moving on now to them Auburn Tigers that I was just talking about. Jackson Arnold transferred in from Oklahoma, and he was pretty inconsistent at Oklahoma last year. He had 12 touchdowns, 3 picks. He added 3 rushing touchdowns. He hit 62.6% of his passes, threw for 1,400 yards, and had 444 rushing yards. Honestly, when you look at them stats, you go, that's not so bad. He did get benched, though, and there was just moments when watching him that you could tell he was just not comfortable. It just didn't look great. He almost looked overwhelmed at times, especially against better competition. And Auburn, who's looking to take a step up, is going to need him not to face them problems because they do have a pretty good, tough schedule this year, and they need to improve. So it's kind of on him and how much he grows heading over there to play. play for Hugh Freeze and, just how much Hugh Freeze can impact him. Looking at the rest of their offense, they have Cam Coleman at receiver. He's another draft eligible guy in 2027 who is really good and I really like. They got Eric Singleton Jr., the transfer receiver from Georgia Tech, out of the portal. I liked him. I was kind of hoping the Gators would target him, but it didn't work out. At running back, they have Damari Alston replacing Jarquez Hunter. Don't know a whole lot about him. At tight end, they have Brandon Frazier. Don't know much about him. At tackle, they got Xavier Chaplin out of the transfer portal from Virginia Tech and Mason Murphy from USC. And then on the interior, they have a couple other draft eligible guys and Dylan Wade and Jeremiah Wright. We'll have to see, how that works out for them. On offense, they definitely have some playmakers that I like and guys that I think could be quite impactful for them, but I just don't know that they have the horses up front to really be able to push this offense forward. Flipping over to defense, I'm not excited about their defense at all. There isn't a whole lot of guys that I think are particularly great here, especially as prospects. They do have some young guys that could develop and take a step up for them. I remember from high school recruiting days, I don't follow it as closely as I used to, but I was pretty familiar with a few of the guys that they have on their D-line that were committed to the Gators or were close to committing to the Gators, that if they take a step forward, it could work out for them, but I'm just not overly excited about their defense, and that's a big reason why I'm not sure about them. Keldrick Falk is probably their top draft eligible prospect from what I could find. Don't really know much about him, and I don't think I'm that excited about him. At corner, they got Kalen Lee, and then their other edge rusher is Kieron Crawford. And then honestly, outside of that, I found one other guy that I thought was really worth talking about is going to be draft eligible. Since I talk about the draft and the draft's the main portion of this channel, I do focus heavily on upperclassmen because I do want you guys to hear the names of people who could possibly be in next year's draft. But they have Quintrell Jamison Travis on the interior of the defensive line. He's also draft eligible. We'll have to see how it ends up working out for him. This defense has a lot of young players. They're going to have to grow as the season goes along, and they're going to have to be able to hopefully step up to take the leap forward that Auburn needs to save Hugh Freeze's job, in my opinion. Taking a look at their schedule, they're over under 7.5. I really only have 4 surefire wins for them. That's Ball State, South Alabama, Vanderbilt, and Mercer. I have 2 losses. I don't think they beat Georgia, and I don't think they beat Alabama. And then they have a lot of toss-ups in here. They play at Baylor to open the year. I'm really not sure how that's going to work out for them. Baylor could be kind of a bad team, and I think they could certainly go in there and beat up on them. But at the same time, I think Baylor improved as last season went along, and with Sawyer Robinson at quarterback out there, or Robertson at quarterback out there, I think Baylor might be an improved team. So I'm just not 100% sure how that matchup's going to go. Then they have Oklahoma and Texas A&M, where they're both on the road back-to-back weeks. Those are both toss-ups to me. I'm really not sure they'll beat A&M, but I'm not that confident in A&M to give them a W there. And then they play Missouri, Arkansas, and Kentucky that are all toss-ups. I think they're better in Arkansas and Kentucky. I'm not going to lie to you, and I almost gave them dubs there. But once again, like I said, I'm just not confident in this Auburn team. I think they're pretty young on defense, and I think on offense, they have the playmakers, but I don't know how their line is, and I just don't know how it's all going to come together as a whole with this team. So I'm just not real confident with them, and I am going to hit the under once again and give them a 7-5 final record on the season. I know at the end of the day, all these records may not match up because of the toss-ups, but I'm giving you my thought and what I think these teams could be. If you're still here though, hit that like button, and if you want to watch me preview or hear about every college football team that's in a power conference and preview them in the NFL and just kind of talk about prospects, I'm going to get into summer scouting later on. If you're into that type of content, hit that subscribe button and follow along. I'll have a ton of information for you. I'll be able to give you true insights because I watch all 22 film. I don't just go on the internet and watch highlights. I actually watch entire game films of these guys, and I think I'm able to give you a pretty good, honest assessment because of that. If you guys like that type of stuff, hit the subscribe button and follow along. Let's move on to the next team, and that's going to be the Georgia Bulldogs. At quarterback, they got Gunnar Stockton. It's going to be his first full year starting. He ended up playing and replacing Carson Beck last year, who transferred away to Miami. He ended with 440 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. He didn't do anything on the ground. He hit 70% of his passes, but he's just a big unknown, and they certainly trust him, and I don't know how to feel about him. I think he showed some dynamic ability in the SEC championship game. I think in the playoff, he looked a lot more overwhelmed, but he will be able to grow next season. And honestly, I didn't see elite traits on him, so I do question his real upside. And I don't think Georgia's some super team like they used to be, where they were able to get by with a more average quarterback. And I have some questions about him for that reason. But at their skill position, they still have good players on this team. They got Colby Young at receiver, and Dylan Bell is exceptional. He may be small, but he's a really good player. And he's a dynamic player out there. And then they went ahead and added Zachariah Branch from USC, and he's a fantastic receiver. He's a big play threat. He's somebody that I expect to maybe be able to elevate this offense, because last year they really struggled at receiver, and I think he could step in and be their best receiver right now, day one. At tight end, they have Oscar Delp, who didn't take the step forward I thought he would last year. I'm really hoping he can step forward in the future and continue to develop and finish out his career good this year and become a good prospect, because I had high hopes for him. Looking at him last summer, and he just didn't hit it. At running back, they still have Nate Frazier. I have a lot of hope in him. He looked good last year. He's not draft eligible, but he's a good player. And then at running back, they have Josh McCray, who they brought in from Illinois. He wasn't exceptionally dynamic, but he averaged like 5.5 yards a carry, which is pretty good. And honestly, I think with a better offensive line, he will be playing probably tougher competition overall. Not to say that the Big 12 last year and honestly, maybe even this year is not tougher at the top. I just think the SEC has more depth as a whole. I still think he'll be able to come in, though, and be able to complement Nate Frazier really well. At tackle, they have Ernest Green III, who's a prospect that you should look out for in the draft next year. Other than that, their offensive line's pretty young still. We'll have to see how that all works out for them, especially after losing their entire interior of the offensive line to the NFL draft last year. You know, that kind of begs some questions on how that's all going to go. Flipping it over to Georgia's defense, they have some real impactful players on this team that I think could really take a step forward and honestly shine, as Dalen Everett is a really good corner for him, and I expect big things out of him. On the interior of the D-line, they have Christian Miller, another guy who I think could step up. He has fantastic size, and I think he'll be a good nose. He's probably not going to be like the biggest pass rusher out there, but he'll stuff the middle of that defense, and they could certainly use that. At linebacker, they got Raylan Wilson, who I think could be a good player for him. And then some other draft-eligible guys that they have is CJ Allen at linebacker, Daniel Harris at corner, safety Ja'Cory Thomas. They also got Zachariah's brother, safety Zion Branch from USC, to come play for him. Don't know how much I really expect out of him. And then at safety, I highlighted an underclassman that I know is going to be really impactful, and he'll likely start for him. That's KJ Bolden. He's a recruit that the Gators went after, and he ultimately chose Georgia, and I expect big things out of this kid. I think he's going to be a really good player, and I think he'll be a huge impact prospect. Maybe not a first-round guy when he comes out, but I think he'll be one of the better prospects in his safety class when he enters the NFL draft. Going ahead and taking a look at their schedule, they have an over-under of 9.5, and as you can tell, I'm pretty confident in them coming close to or likely hitting that over, because I gave them wins against Marshall, Austin Peay, at Tennessee, Kentucky, at Auburn, at Mississippi State, Charlotte, and Georgia Tech. I gave them wins over right away, which only left 4 toss-ups, and they expect them to maybe win 9.5 games. Well, if they go 2-2, they're going to hit the over, and I honestly think that's what they'll do here, and I think they finish 10-2. I think college football, it's going to be really hard to have undefeated teams with transfer portal and teams not being able to stockpile talent. And I look at this Georgia team, and I don't see them as a super team like they used to be. And I think 10-2 is a good year and could get them back into the playoffs. And certainly think that they'll be happy. Well, maybe not happy with that. I think it's a pretty realistic projection for them. Going ahead and moving on to another team that I don't think will be that great, and that's the Kentucky Wildcats. At quarterback, they have Zach Calzada, who used to start for Auburn, I think it was, earlier in his career, and Texas A&M. Either way, he played last year at Incarnate World, which is where, if you follow the NFL draft, Cam Ward began his career. Either way, Calzada looked really good last year for him. He had 3,700 yards, 35 touchdowns, 9 picks. He added 330 yards on the ground and 5 more scores. So honestly, he looked really good last year in college, at the FCS level. We'll see if he can transfer back up and continue that success as a senior here in the SEC for Kentucky. Some playmakers you should get to know. Kendrick Law, who transferred over from Alabama. I actually think he's a pretty good player. He hasn't really lived up to hype, but I still like him. At receiver, they have Fred Ferrier II and Jamori Macklin. Macklin's probably the guy I expect more of an impact out of. At running back, they have Dante Dowdle. Don't really know what to expect out of him. Tight end Josh Caddis is somebody that I do think will be pretty good for him. I've watched him, and he impressed me some last year. At tackle, they got transfers for both sides, and I don't know how to say this name, Shiza Pete from New Mexico State and Alex Wollenschlager from Bowling Green. And then on the interior, they brought in Joshua Braun, another guy I'm familiar with. He started out with the Gators and transferred away to Arkansas, and now he's at Kentucky. Honestly, he looked like an okay prospect for the Gators. I wasn't so sad when he left. And then they also have Jagger Burton on the interior, who's going to be draft eligible, so you should get to know him as well. But honestly, this offense doesn't look very dynamic, and I'm not very confident that they're going to be very good at all. Now, flipping it over to their defense, I'm probably even less confident about their defense, if I'm being honest with you. There's just not a lot of people that I think are going to be really good prospects in the NFL. And I don't even know that there's a ton of great college prospects here either. At safety, they have Jordan Lovett. He was pretty good. I have some confidence in him. Jonquise Hardaway at corners, a big, long guy who I think could develop and maybe have some upside there. He was listed at like 6'2", 6'3", so he's a bigger guy. They have linebacker Alex Afari Jr., who was pretty good for him last year. And then other than that, they have some draft eligible guys, but honestly, I don't think they're going to be that impactful. They have Khalil Saunders. They had DJ Waller Jr. at corner. He's another bigger guy. He's a transfer from Michigan that I remember. For some reason, I remember him as a recruit, and he just, I don't think's really lived up to hype. We'll see how it goes for him. They got David Gusta from Washington State on the interior of the defensive line. They have another linebacker that has some potential upside in Davron Rayner. And then at safety, they also have Ty Bryant. It's just not a unit I'm very excited about, if I'm being honest with you. And honestly, it shows Vegas isn't that high on them either. Their over-under's 4.5, and I'm not confident they're going to get to that. I gave them 3 wins, one against Toledo, one against Eastern Michigan, and one against Tennessee Tech. Any one of their bigger competition teams, I just don't trust them against, and I gave them 2 toss-ups, one at Auburn and one at Vanderbilt. I think they'll be lucky to get one of them, and I really am not sure they're going to get either one of them, to be honest with you. I gave them losses to Louisville, Florida, Tennessee, Texas, Georgia, South Carolina, and Ole Miss, and I really don't see a way, unless they pull off a huge upset, that they beat any one of them teams right there. If I'm a Kentucky fan, this is probably going to be a really long season. You lost a ton of good players to the portal in the offseason, and I don't think Mark Stoops is the guy anymore. I think it's time to move on from him. He made your football program relevant, but unfortunately, I think he's holding you back to accelerating into the future, and I don't like this team that much. I don't think they're that great, and it's not that they're a rival. I'm just not a fan of them. I don't think they're going to be very good. I'm going to give them a 3-9 record for the season. To Mark Stoops' credit, he usually gets his team to play pretty tough, so maybe they sneak out some games that I just don't think they can win. But I'm going to stick with my gut on this one and be lower on these guys and pretty firmly on the under with the Kentucky Wildcats. Moving on to the LSU Tigers, we got Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback. He's really good, man. 44,000 yards, 29 touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns. He did have 12 picks. He hit 64% of his passes. He's a legit NFL prospect. He has to get them turnovers under control, though. He's a guy you need to learn about if you follow the NFL draft and you're an NFL fan. Pay attention to him. Watch some LSU games because your team may be interested in him, especially if you're a team like maybe the Browns, anyone else that passed over on a quarterback this year. Maybe get to know Garrett Nussmeier a little bit. Either way, looking at the rest of the LSU offense, they got Berrien Brown, a receiver from Kentucky, who I think could be a very impactful deep threat for these guys. They also got Nick Anderson from Oklahoma at receiver. And then they have Aaron Anderson and Chris Hilton Jr. both returning at receiver for him. Other than that, they have a lot of underclassmen across their offensive line. They're really young, and it's going to be interesting to see how they perform next year. They lost both tackles. I think they lost all but one guy on their offensive line to the NFL. So it'll certainly be interesting to see how that goes for them next season. Some underclassmen to get to know. Trades Green at tight end is somebody that I think could step up and fill the shoes really well, and maybe even eventually be an upgrade to what they already had at tight end last year in Mason Taylor. And then at running back, Caden Durham returns. He's not draft eligible, but I do think he's a really good running back. Flipping it over to the defensive side, they have a lot of prospects to get to know over here, and I do think they're going to have a really good defense. Linebacker, they've got Whit Weeks and Harold Perkins Jr., both guys that are impactful as heck, both coming back from an injury, though, so we got to see how that goes and how they recover. Perkins had an ACL. Whit Weeks had a terrible ankle injury. They got some impactful transfers. One of them, Patrick Payton on the edge from Florida State's a guy that just never really lived up to hype, but he's a really good prospect if he can put it all together. They also got Jack Pyburn from Florida, an edge rusher. You know, I really like Pyburn, and he was all about the Gators, and I hated seeing him go, but I understand if he feels like his NFL future is better off being in a different defense and utilizing more of his skill sets, or at least giving him the option to show more of his skill sets. So honestly, we'll see. I'm not 100% sure how that'll work out. I like Pyburn. I think he'll certainly, at least as an edge rusher, make an impact. They have a lot of young guys to get to know. You can see their names here across the bottom. They got a corner in Mansour Delane from Virginia Tech who's transferring in, and they have Ashton Stamps at corner as well, who was already on their team. Those are kind of the draft eligible guys. Like I said, some young guys here to check out. Let's go ahead and look at their schedule. Their over-under's 8.5, and I'm definitely think I'm going to hit the over on these guys. I gave them wins against Louisiana Tech, Southeast Louisiana, Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, Arkansas, Western Kentucky, and Oklahoma. They have toss-up games against Clemson, Florida, Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Alabama. And this is going to be one of them times where I'm trusting Nussmeier taking a step up and not a step back at quarterback. And I just think their overall talent on defense is going to be really good, especially with the big name players and maybe some of their transfers hitting. The offensive line definitely scares me, but I'm going to give them a 9-3 final record. And I'm going to trust the LSU Tigers and hope that, I'm not wrong on this one. Next up is going to be the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Blake Shapen's going to be their starting quarterback. He transferred in last year, got hurt. He was pretty good for him. 974 yards, 8 touchdowns, a pick, 2 rushing touchdowns. We'll have to see if he can stay, if he stays healthy this year, how big of an impact he can have. But this team's not very good. They got a ton of transfers in here. And honestly, I don't view a lot of these guys. Maybe Albert Reese, the fourth at tackle, could be a legitimate NFL prospect. I just don't know that I trust a lot of these guys. There's a lot of unknowns and their playmakers. I'm not going to go as in depth with them because I genuinely think most of these guys are undrafted at best, and I don't expect a lot out of Mississippi State. All the names are there, and if you have anybody that I think I should have talked about, hit me up down in the comments. You got to get to know their skill position guys like David Booth, Marcus Allen, who came over from Eastern Michigan, Brandon Thompson, who came over from Oklahoma, and Aiden Williams, who came over from Ole Miss. Every receiver that's expected to start for them is a transfer. They lost all their top guys. It's just a lot of unknowns, and we'll have to see what ends up happening in this Jeff Lebby offense. Flipping it over to their defense, I'm not very excited about it either. It's hard to talk about this team. I'm not trying to dog on any Mississippi State fans. I have a buddy who's a Mississippi State fan, and I'm excited to watch the Gators play him, and I'm hoping we're able to go to the Swamp this year to watch it, but I think it should be a blowout for the Gators. Either way, talking about their defense, they got Isaac Smith at safety, Hunter Washington at safety, and Nick Mitchell at linebacker, who are all expected to be impactful players for him. They got Red Hibbler, an edge rusher from NC State out of the portal, an interior D lineman in Will Whitson out of Coastal, and a corner in Dwight Lewis III out of Marion. I don't even know where that college is. A couple other seniors to get to know, an interior defensive lineman Kedrick Bingley Jones, and edge rusher Brandon Jennings. Don't expect these guys to really be a whole lot of NFL prospects, and I expect Mississippi State to be pretty bad. Vegas does too. They gave them a 3.5 over/under win total. I have them beating Southern Miss. I have them beating Alcorn State and NIU. I have them losing to Arizona State, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Florida, Texas, Georgia, and Ole Miss, and 2 toss-up games in here that I'm not very confident in even calling toss-ups, and that's Arkansas and Missouri, and I actually have them losing both and finishing their season at 3-9. I'm even concerned they could lose one of these games they shouldn't and only have 2 wins this year. I'm just not confident in this team at all. Their roster doesn't look good, and the more I looked into it, the more depressed I got. I want to be excited about every team I talk about, but this is just one that they're depressing to look at, and I'm sorry for the Mississippi State fans. Next up is the Missouri Tigers. Their quarterback competition's far from over. They got Bo Pribula from Penn State out of the portal. He has some decent stats, but they're all in mop-up duty in specific roles, so you don't really know much about him. And then they got Sam Horn, who's a highly rated quarterback. Wears number 21, which is super weird. Never liked that, but he was hurt last year. I think he had Tommy John on his elbow. He's back, and they're still competing. I don't really know who's going to be the starter. I expect Pribula to be the starter for him, but I could be wrong, so I want to make sure I mention Sam Horn. Now, they did get Kevin Coleman Jr. from Mississippi State at receiver. He could be a very impactful player for him. He was one of the few good players in Mississippi State last year, and he chose to leave. Other receivers, they have Joshua Manning and Marquise Johnson. At running back, they got Ahmad Hardy from ULM, and they have Jamal Roberts, who was there last year. Those 2 guys are going to compete, and I do think Hardy's pretty good. I'll be honest, I don't expect a whole lot out of him, but I had a dynasty going on this channel before I flipped to just talking football with ULM, and Hardy is a guy that I remember using. At tight end, they got Brett Norfleet, who's pretty good. I've heard of him. That says something. At tackle, they got Keegan Trost from Wake Forest. Don't know a whole lot about him. Caden Green could be a good interior offensive line prospect. I do know that. And then they also have Connor Tollison on the interior of the offensive line. I think their offense is interesting. There's just a lot of unknowns overall, so I don't really know what to expect. They have some good players, but the quarterback position's new. It could easily be better. It wasn't very good last year, if I'm being honest with you. Brady Cook wasn't great, and I do think Kevin Coleman can step in at receiver well. There's a little bit more inexperience there. We'll see how it all works out. I'm not as confident on Tigers as I'd like to be. Flipping over to their defense here, they have some guys that I really like. Dalen Carnell's good at safety. Edge Zion Young has the size you're looking for as in an NFL prospect, so if he steps up, I could see him really skyrocketing as far as draft value goes. And then on the interior, they have Chris McClellan, another former Gator that was awesome. I love this kid, and I hated seeing him go, and he showed a lot of flashes last year for Missouri, in my opinion. He wasn't as consistent as you would like, but he definitely showed the upside that I seen with him when he was with the Gators, and I do think he could shine for these guys. They also have Damon Wilson the second they got from Georgia. He's an edge rusher slash linebacker. He was a highly rated recruit, and some people still think he can meet that potential and take off here with the Tigers. On the interior of the D-line, they have Sterling Webb. Don't know a lot about him. He's draft eligible, though. They also have Tristan Newsome at linebacker. Don't know a ton about him. They got Stephen Hall, a corner from Washington State, and they also have Drayden Norwood at corner. Then safety, they got Jalen Catalon. I can't believe this dude's still in college. He came over from UNLV. He's been pretty much here, there, and everywhere. Once really highly thought of, but injuries have really hampered him. He looked good at UNLV last year, but I didn't know he had a year left. And honestly, I cannot believe we're still talking about him, but here we are. We'll see if he's able to stay healthy and make an impact for the Tigers. Vegas has them at 7.5 wins. I don't think I'm as high on them as Vegas is. I have 4 certainty wins in Vanderbilt, UMass, Louisiana, and Central Arkansas. I do think they'll lose to South Carolina, Alabama, and Texas A&M, and there's a lot of toss-up games in there. I think Kansas will take a step forward if they can stay healthy. Auburn is a toss-up game. So is Mississippi State. Honestly, I don't think it really is, but I couldn't give Mississippi State all else. Oklahoma and Arkansas are also toss-up games, and I decided to hit the under here, and I actually am going to go at 6-6, which is worse than what I expected coming into it. Eli Drinkowitz is a good coach, don't get me wrong. I'm just not sure that I trust this version of the Missouri team, and I'm not sure that this is going to be their best year. To me, it feels like they're almost rebuilding for a better year next year, getting experience for guys this year, and then things will improve next year. I'm expecting a step back. Maybe 6-6 is harsh, but that's what I'm expecting. Moving on to the Oklahoma Sooners, they got one of the most exciting transfer portal guys in John Mateer to come in and play quarterback from Washington State. 29 touchdowns through the air. He also added 15 on the ground, 7 interceptions, 64, almost 65% completion percentage. He's somebody that I'm excited to dig into his film. I haven't got to it yet, but everybody's very excited about him, so I hear he's kind of erratic and fun to watch. I'm definitely interested to dig into it. At receiver, they got Deion Burks and Jaden Gibson, and then they also got a guy from Arkansas, Pine Bluff, and Giovanni Gibson. Don't know much about him. We'll have to see. Another guy they got, though, that I do know is Isaiah Satanga, and I do think he could take a step up for him. But the other big impactful guy they got out of the portal was running back Jaden Ott from Cal. He's a fantastic prospect. I thought he was going to be in draft this year. I was pretty surprised when he returned and decided to go back to college and transfer, but I think he'll make a big impact and he should fit in really well for the Sooners. At tight end, they got Will Huggins from Pittsburgh State. Don't know much about him. They also have a couple interior offensive line prospects and Troy Everett and Fabechi Nowewu. Don't know much about these guys. Haven't watched film. We'll have to see how the season goes. They're another team, though, looking at their offense. There's a lot of excitement coming in and thinking, what they can be, but there's just a lot of unknowns because they have new players and they're counting on new players. And guys like Mateer was really good, but he was 1 year really good at Washington State. The SEC is a step up, and he was pretty wild at Washington State, so I'll be curious to see how he plays in a tougher conference and if he's able to maintain that play style while still being as effective. Definitely interested in that one. Ott is a pretty proven guy, and I think he'll be good, but I don't know about their offensive line, and Mateer's, he's going to be facing a big jump in competition, so we'll see how he handles it. Moving on to their defense, there's some guys here to get excited about. At the edge, they have R. Mason Thomas. People really like him. At safety, they have Robert Spears Jennings, and on the interior of the D-line, they have Demonic Williams. I like him. I think he could be a good nose tackle. I haven't really fully dug into his film, but I did watch some Oklahoma, and I did write down number 52 a couple times. I thought I would point him out, mostly in run situations, I will say, but either way, that's going to be impactful for this team. At edge, they got Marvin Jones Jr. from Florida State, another guy that's hung around college longer than I expected. A lot of hype. We'll see if he's able to match it. At safety, they got Kendall Colby, and then they have a couple younger guys that haven't done much that people are excited about. One of them is edge Adepuji Adebaware. We'll see about him, but there's some hype about him possibly being able to step up and be impactful for him. And then they also got linebacker Kendall Daniels from Oklahoma State. I don't really know what to fully expect from this defense. They have some good players, but I do think they're lacking talent for the SEC. They're over under 6.5, and I'm not as confident in them. I gave them 3 solid wins and then a lot of toss-ups in there. I have wins over Illinois State, Temple, and Kent State, and I have losses at South Carolina, Alabama, and LSU. That means they have 6 toss-ups in here, and I think they probably get 3 of them against Michigan, Auburn, Texas, and that's only a toss-up because it's a rivalry game. Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Missouri. I'm going to get, like I said, split the difference on the toss-ups and give these guys a 6-6 final record. I really don't know how I feel about Oklahoma, and that kind of feels generous. Brent Venables was a really good defensive coach, but he just seems overmatched as a head coach, if you're asking me. And I do think that they need to probably move on from him, even though they just gave him an extension. Moving on now to the Ole Miss Rebels. At quarterback, they got Austin Simmons stepping up. He's played some spot duty, doesn't have a ton of stats. He looked really good against Georgia, though, when he filled in when Jackson Dart was hurt last year. And he's another guy. He's super young, even though he's I think a redshirt sophomore. He's very young. He entered college like 2 years earlier. He was committed to the Gators for a while, flipped on signing day to the Rebels, unfortunately, and he has looked good and he's looked apart. I'm excited to see him play. I think he could be really good. We'll have to see how his supporting cast works out. They got a ton of transfers in here, but there are guys to be excited about. At wide receiver, they got Dazon Stribling from Oklahoma State, Harrison Wallace III from Penn State, and Caleb Oden from Alabama, and then they already had Caden Lee. I think there's a ton of potential in this receiving room. Stribling and Harrison Wallace III are two guys that I really like. Odom needs to step up, but he has a lot of potential. I really think, like I said, Harrison Wallace III and Stribling, though, are great gets, and Simmons can chuck the ball around, and I think they'll be able to continue to do that with these guys. At running back, they got Logan Diggs, Dominique Thomas, and Damian Taylor, who they brought in from Troy. They also brought in Kawan Lacey from Missouri. I think he was a pretty highly recruited player because I've heard his name, and I was surprised when he left Missouri in the portal. At tight end, they brought in Luke Hates from Arkansas. I remember him. He should be an impactful player for him at tight end. They also have Daquin Wright at tight end. And then across the offensive line, a couple guys to get to know. They got Jaden Williams at tackle, and then Patrick Kutzes from Arkansas was a transfer on the interior. We'll see how it all works out for him, but I think this offense is primed to continue their success. There's a lot of new pieces, and it may take them a little bit to gel, but I think they'll still be good underneath Lane Kiffin. I just trust him, and I think that I really like the guys they brought in as well. Flipping over to their defense, they still have some impactful players on this team. Like at linebacker, they got Suntarine, I think's how you say his name, or Suntarine Perkins. He wears number 4. Dude's super impactful. He popped on film multiple times last year. I really liked him. On the interior, they got Xavier Harris. I think he'll be a good, impactful player for him. And then they also got TJ Dotery at linebacker. He's stepping up. I think he could be an impactful guy for him. And then other than that, they brought a bunch of guys in from the portal to backfill this roster once again. I don't think it'll be as good as last year. I'm not going to lie to you. But on the edge, they brought in Princely Umanmiellen's brother, Prince Will Umanmiellen from Nebraska. At corner, they brought in Ricky Fletcher from South Alabama. At safety, they brought in Sage Ryan from LSU and Kapenga Ushekin from Washington State. I don't even know if I'm saying that name right, if I'm being honest with you. And then they also brought in another corner in Jalen Braxton from Arkansas. They're filling this team in once again with a bunch of transfers. We'll see if it works out for them. There's really no way to know until they get together if they're going to gel. I think this team's probably not as good as they were last year. I think they missed their window to get into the playoffs, honestly. But I do think they still have a really good roster, and I do trust their offense still. So their over-under's 8.5. And with that, I gave them wins against Georgia State, Kentucky, Arkansas, Tulane, Washington State, the Citadel, and Mississippi State. Their toss-up games are against Florida, South Carolina, Oklahoma, Georgia, and LSU. The problem is here, I'd like to say they go like 3-2 or 2-3. I don't think they're going to. I think this roster's down a bit from last year, so I really don't think they probably beat LSU or Georgia. I definitely don't think they're going to beat Florida, but I can't be that confident. Or South Carolina, another team that I think could be really good. Lenoris Sellers, man, I really want to believe in him there for the Gamecocks. So I'm going to give them just one win in their toss-ups. It's kind of a risky thing to do, and everything tells me they should be 9-3, but I'm going to put the Ole Miss Rebels at 8-4 and say they step back a bit and lose another game this year. Now going ahead and moving on to the South Carolina Gamecocks. Lenoris Sellers, man, he was inconsistent last year. He had 18 passing touchdowns, 7 rushing touchdowns, and he also had 7 interceptions. He hit 65.6% of his passes, but he was erratic, and he definitely has a ton of developing to do. I just see a very high ceiling with him, and I think he's going to possibly be able to hit it. The biggest problem is, how good is South Carolina's roster actually going to be? That's what we don't know. At receiver, Nick Harbor, man, the dude's huge and fast. He just hasn't put it together yet. Is he finally going to be able to do that? We can all hope that he might finally do it. They also have Jared Brown at receiver and Mazeo Bennett Jr. as well. Don't know much about them guys, I'm not going to lie to you. At running back, they got Rayshal Fajan from Utah State. Running back Oscar Ardaway III as well was already on the team, so he could compete for carries. At tight end, they got Michael Smith and Jordan Dingle, who transferred in from Kentucky, competing for spots, or competing for the same spot, I should say, for playing time, and I don't know how that's going to work out. Across the offensive line, there really isn't anybody to get that excited about, in my opinion, right now. A lot of younger guys. I'm just not sure. I think Sellers could lead this offense and drive the engine. So I want to be confident in him, but I also look at the supporting cast and I question how much he'll be able to develop and if he'll be able to get himself out of the bad habits that got him in troubles last year. Let's go ahead and take a look at their defense, though, where they do have some really good players on this team. They have edge Dylan Stewart. This dude's probably going to be a top player in the 2027 NFL draft. They also have safety Jalen Kilgore, who could be really good. And then beyond that, there are a few more questions. Safety DQ Smith could be good. Edge Brian Thomas Jr. could be good. They also brought in Demon Clowney from Charlotte, who plays edge rusher. He is related to Jadeveon Clowney. He's not a brother. He's like a cousin or something. Don't really know how much of an impact. He'll probably be a rotational guy. Then they also have Judge Collier at corner. The defense is a little bit more questionable. I don't think they quite have the front seven that they had last year, which really drove their defense and drove this team being better than expected. But I do think Dylan Stewart's really good and he could drive this team. And if they hit with Demon Clowney or Brian Thomas Jr., they could continue to have a good pass rush, and that'll at least help this team. So Vegas has them at 7.5 win, and I do honestly think that's fair. I'm betting on this team, though. I'm giving them wins over Virginia Tech, South Carolina State, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Kentucky, Oklahoma, and Coastal Carolina. They have toss-up games against Clemson, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Alabama, and LSU. And I do think they probably lose 3 of them games, and I'm going to give them a final record of 9-3. It's pretty aggressive. I'm not going to lie to you, and I think most people probably will disagree with this one, but I'm betting on Lenore Sellers taking that step that I think he genuinely has in him, and I really think he could be a great NFL prospect, which means he could drive this team ahead even further. So I'm betting on that with the South Carolina Gamecocks. 9-3 is aggressive, but I think they can repeat what they did last year simply off of the quarterback as long as he stays healthy. Now, moving on to one of the most polarizing teams and a team that I just don't know how to feel about. That's the Tennessee Volunteers. They have Joey Aguilar, transferred from App State along the way to UCLA as well. He was very inconsistent at App State last year, and I really don't know how I feel about him. I don't think he's that great of a player, but maybe this offense will work for him. They already had Jake Merkingler at quarterback as well. I don't know if I'm saying that right. He's another guy still competing for the job and he could possibly start. They're just young at the position with everything that happened with Nico Iamaleava. And I don't know what to expect from this offense. I know they have a very good head coach who's very good at calling plays, and he should be able to design a scheme that works. I just don't know how big of a step back they're going to take because they do lack some of the top-end playmakers. They have Mike Matthews at receiver. Chris Brazzell II could be a good wide receiver prospect. He's somebody that a lot of people have been waiting to step up. They also have Braylon Staley at receiver. Don't know a ton about him. At running back, they have Peyton Lewis and Deshaun Bishop. And then at tight end, Miles Kisselman, when he comes back healthy, should be a good player for him. At tackle, they have Lance Hurd, who's the only returning offensive lineman from last year. Everybody else is going to be new, including David Sanders, who they expect to start at right tackle, who's a true freshman. He's a 5-star recruit. We'll see if he's able to step up. On the interior, they got a couple good transfers in Wendell Moe from Arizona and Sam Pendleton from Notre Dame. We'll see if they're able to work out and be as good as people think they could be, because I do certainly think this team's going to need them in order to be able to be successful on offense. I'm just not confident, and I'm very unsure about this. I'm not sure how to predict the Tennessee Volunteers this year. On the defensive side of the ball, Jermon McCoy's coming back from an injury. He's a very good corner, though, and I do really like him. I'm just unsure how that's going to go. Injuries delaying the start to a season, coming in midway through and then working himself back to form, it could lead to some inconsistencies. At edge, they have Joshua Josephs, who's going to have some upside. And then on the interior, they have Jackson Moy, who transferred in a couple years ago from, I think it was Stanford. Other than that, there's not a ton of guys that I'm super excited about on this team. I'm not going to lie to you on the defense. They have Dominic Bailey on the edge. On the interior, they have Bryson Eason. They got a couple guys at corner and Jalen McMurray and Ricky Gibson, the third, to keep an eye out for the future. At safety, they have Andre Turrentine, who I have heard about. And then at linebacker, they have Arian Carter and Jeremiah Tallender. Don't know a ton about them. This defense does have some talent, though. I do know that. They lost a lot of good players to the draft. Jermon McCoy missing time at the beginning of the year is not going to help them. I think this team's possibly going to be set up for a disaster season, but Vegas still feels pretty good about it, giving them an 8.5 win total. And I got to say, I was actually pretty surprised looking at their schedule. I can see why they did that. I gave them wins against Syracuse, East Tennessee State, UAB, Mississippi State, Kentucky, and New Mexico State. I did give them losses against Florida and Georgia, and they have 3 toss-up games in there, one against Arkansas, Alabama, and Oklahoma. But they already had basically 7 built-in wins, so I gave them an 8-4 final record. I'm not confident in this. I'm not going to lie to you. Syracuse could be better like they were last year and maintain it. I just don't know with the quarterback change if they'll be able to do that. Losing McCord to the draft, but Maybe they surprise and maybe Vanderbilt surprises again. They actually look like they could possibly get there. I'm just not confident in the Volunteers. 8 wins feels rich. I was going to go 7-5, but looking at their schedule, it certainly seemed fair to go 8-4 with these guys. Next up, we got the Texas A&M Aggies. They got Marcel Reed, who had a good year for him last year. He's a young guy that I think is going to develop and could certainly take a step forward. I really like him. They did add some playmakers around him. They got KC Concepcion out of the portal from NC State. Very good receiver there. They already had Terry Boosie, who they think should be able to step up. And then they also got Mario Craver from Mississippi State. At running back, they still got Le'Veon Moss, Ruben Owens, and Amari Daniels. They're loaded there, and they'll be able to run the ball with Marcel Reed. At tight end, they got Imari Niblack from Texas, former Alabama guy. Don't know if he'll be able to live up to the hype. He hasn't really done it yet. They also have a dude from like Austria or Switzerland. I think it's Switzerland. Theo Milan Ostrom, who plays tight end as well. At tackle, they got Trey Zune III and Demetrius Crownover. On the interior, they got Armaj Reed Adams, who's a guy that I thought would declare last year. He should be a really good NFL draft prospect. Keep an eye on him. If you're into the NFL draft, he's a guy that you might want to get familiar with. And then they also have Kolonu Feu. I will admit I don't know a ton about him, but he's another draft eligible guy on the interior. I do think this offense should be pretty good for the Aggies this year. And I think the Aggies should be a pretty good team, honestly. Flipping it over to their defense, they have Torian York, who could be really good at linebacker. They have Will Lee III at corner, who could be really good. And then edge Cassius Howell. I don't know a ton about him, but there was some hype about him in the NFL draft circles as well that I've seen online. It's very early, so that stuff can be very inaccurate right now. They also have TJ Searcy out from Florida on the edge. I really liked him. That was a loss for the Gators. I think he could come in and make an impact for these guys. They got Albert Regis on the interior. He could be a really good player. I've heard of him, and he made some plays for the Aggies. And linebacker, they got Scooby Williams, who's another former Gator. He was pretty good last year, and I think he has some room to grow and could step up. At corner, they have Des Ricks. He's had a ton of hype. He might be able to finally live up to it, and he's still young. So he still has, I think, 2 more years in college, but he is draft eligible. And he's somebody that could step up and go to the NFL. He's had some hype. At safety, they have Bryce Anderson and Dalton Brooks. And then they also brought in Deion Hayes from Colorado on the edge. He could start for him. I don't know how big of an impact he'll have. He's somebody that's kind of hit or miss. He'll probably rotate in pass rushing situations, but he didn't really live up to the hype at Colorado after transferring there from Pitt. We'll see if he's able to rebound and rebuild himself a little bit here at A&M. Overall, Vegas has them at just 7.5 wins, which kind of shocked me. I was expecting them more at 8. And then I looked at their schedule and I was like, well, maybe that makes a little more sense. I gave them wins against UTSA, Utah State, Mississippi State, Arkansas, Missouri, and Samford. And then I gave them 2 losses to LSU and Notre Dame. And then their toss-up games, I gave them Auburn, Florida, South Carolina, and Texas, and I have them splitting them and finish the season at 8-4. I actually think they'll be able to easily do that, and this is a team that wouldn't shock me if they finally put it together and maybe sneak to 9 wins. I really like Marcel Reed. He was exciting to watch. He does need to get more consistent, but he could lead this offense forward, and I think their defense could be decent. They definitely lost a ton of talent, but I like some of their additions on the edge. I think TJ Searcy could be really good. We'll see what ends up happening for these guys. They got a ton of talent on this team, and I do think they have some room to grow. We'll see if they're able to get there. 8-4, though, is my final projection. I feel comfortable with that. Moving on now to the Texas Longhorns. Arch Manning's taking over for him. He hasn't not done a lot, but when he's been out there, he's looked really good, filling in for Quinn Ewers. 67.8% completion percentage. I have started to watch tape on him. I don't expect him to be in next year's class, but I see the hype in this guy. I really do. They also don't have a ton of draft eligible talent on offense. They have a lot of guys who will have to return to college. We're going to go ahead and talk about them, though, because they're guys you need to know to watch Texas this year. We're going to lead it off with Ryan Wingo at wide receiver, and they also have Parker Livingstone at wide receiver. One draft-eligible guy there is DeAndre Moore Jr. I think Wingo and Livingstone are probably going to lead them, though, if I'm being honest with you. At running back, they got CJ Baxter coming back from injury. They have Quintravion Wisner and Jarrett Gibson also on the roster. Gibson's not draft-eligible, but he was kind of a power back for him last year, and he was good. At tight end, they have Jordan Washington, who's also an underclassman that's expected to start for him. And then on the interior, they have a couple guys who could be, worth keeping an eye on for the NFL draft. One in Cole Hudson and the other in DJ Campbell. I think this offense is going to be young, but I still expect it to be explosive. Arch Manning looks like a really good prospect. I'm not going to lie to you. And I think this could go really well for the Longhorns. And we'll have to see, though, because there's still a lot of unknown with how young this team is. Flipping it over to their defense, they do have a lot of returning talent that is really good. We're going to start it off with another guy who's not even draft eligible, and Colin Simmons on the edge. He's a really good prospect, man. He looked really good for him last year, and he's explosive. He's going to be great in 2027 NFL draft. I'm not even going to lie to you. I expect him to be a top guy there. At linebacker, they got Anthony Hill Jr., who's really good. And then at safety, they got Michael Taft, who's returning. I mean, these guys are both expected to lead this defense, and I think they'll be able to do that. On the edge, they have Ethan Burke, and they also have Trey Moore, who's kind of like a hybrid edge linebacker guy. He transferred in last year from UTSA. He was expected to make a bigger impact than he did. Maybe this year he'll be able to step up and fulfill that. On the interior, they got Cole Brevard from Purdue out of the transfer portal, and then a couple guys to keep an eye on at corner. One's Malik Muhammad, and the other is Jalen Gillaboo. I think their defense will still be really good next year. I think the Longhorns are going to be a really tough team to reckon with. Vegas has them at 9.5, and I'm going to go ahead and give them wins over San Jose State, UTEP, Sam Houston State, Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, and Arkansas. That leaves them with 4 toss-up games. They have Texas A&M, because it's a rival. Honestly, I think they're a better roster. Georgia, I think they're a better roster, but they could not get over that hump last year. And Georgia surprisingly made them look really bad. Oklahoma's a toss-up, once again, because it's a rivalry game. And then Ohio State to open the year is going to be one heck of a tough game that I'm excited to watch. Ohio State's going to be breaking in a new quarterback just like Texas, and we'll get to learn a lot about these teams there. Now, the Longhorns are the team in the SEC I'm going to be the most aggressive with. I'm stamping them with an 11-1 record, and I really am believing in Coach Steve Sarkisian and Arch Manning being able to lead this team forward. I don't know if I'm right about this. This is the one I'm putting my bet on, and we'll see if I'm right, honestly. I don't know if I'm going to be right, but 11-1, and I'm going to be aggressive with the Longhorns. As we move on to our final team, it's the Vanderbilt Commodores. If you're still sticking around, hit that subscribe button. Come on, what you doing? You're still here. At least give me a like. I would truly appreciate that. Either way, let's move on to the Commodores. Diego Pavia is returning at quarterback. He was really good for him last year, but he was kind of wild and inconsistent as well at times. Ultimately, he's going to be the engine that drives this team forward, though. If he's really good again, they're going to be competitive. If he falls off at all, they're not going to be very good, because honestly, they don't have a ton of draft eligible people on this team that look very good, if I'm just being fully honest with you. We'll start off with their playmakers, and this time I'm going to start at tight end Eli Stowers, because he's a true NFL prospect, and I think he'll be really good for the Commodores. And he's the one guy that you kind of need to know. And honestly, probably the one guy that's really going to excite people in the draft community. Everybody else, I don't even know if they're going to be draftable, but we're going to mention them. At receiver, they got Junior Sherrill. They also got Trent Hudson from Mississippi State and Richie Hoskins. At running back, they got Cedric Alexander. And then on the offensive line, they just got a bunch of transfers that are older, and we'll see if they're able to mesh. They got Isaiah Glass from Oklahoma State and Bryce Henderson from South Dakota State. On the interior, they got Jordan White from Liberty and Sterling Porcher from Texas Tech. And then they also had Chase Mitchell returning to their team. This offense is a whole lot of unknown, if I'm just being honest with you, and I don't know how it's going to play out for them. But if Pavia is able to be like he was last year, they'll probably eke out more wins than I expect. I just think going to be really hard for him to be able to do that. As we flip over to the defense, there's just nothing to be excited about over here, in my opinion. I got Martel Hyde at corner, edge Cordray Seidner, and linebacker Langston Patterson. On the interior, they had Yilian Adura, and edge Miles Capers. I just don't think their defense is going to be very good. And even with Pavia's magic, I just don't know that they're going to be able to stop people well enough to actually be able to compete. Maybe I just don't know that much about Vanderbilt, but I'm not confident in these guys. Vegas gave them a 4.5 win total. I gave them wins over Charleston Southern, Georgia State, and Utah State. I gave them losses versus South Carolina, Alabama, LSU, Missouri, Texas, Auburn, and Tennessee. And they had 2 toss-up games, one against Virginia Tech, one against Kentucky. And to be honest with you guys, I'm going to give them 1 win out of that and say they finished 4-8. And I think it's going to be kind of fall back to more of a normal Vanderbilt Commodores type record and expectation. Maybe Pavia can get him to 6 wins again. I'd love to see him do it. I just honestly don't think it's in there, and I don't expect it to end up happening. But this has been a very long video, so if you're still here, I want to thank you for watching. You have to be real dedicated. Leave some comments down below. Tell me how you feel about my record prediction for your team. You know, it's going to be pretty tough here. There's going to be some fans that are heated down in the comments, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear you defend why I'm wrong, if you don't mind. And I'll try to defend my position to you in the comments as well. I want to thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Have a great day. I'll catch you in the next one, which should be the Big Ten, which will hopefully be out next week. Have a great night or a great day. I'm out.